Good evening, everybody, to our Transatlantica session at the Kreisky Forum. In this session, we follow transatlantic relations, developments in the United States, but also in connection to European developments very closely. And I'm very pleased that tonight we are having a very special guest from Washington, Stephen Beller, renowned historian, political commentator, with whom I will have a discussion about the recent developments in the United States in light also of the beginning campaign for the presidential elections in the fall. Stephen, welcome, and I'm looking forward to our talk. I would like to begin our discussion not looking at the most recent events, although I hope we will come to that in the course of our discussion, but an outlook what is going on at the moment in the running up to the presidential elections. We follow a lot, also through the media and television, newspapers, what is happening in the Trump campaign, what is happening with the president, what is going on here. But we hear very little what is happening on the Democratic side. We know very little what is Joe Biden going to do, what are the focus on, what are the main themes of their campaign. We know that the Democratic candidate, Joe Biden, has at the moment an advantage in the polls by a considerable margin over President Trump. How do you see that? Is that a real advantage that he has? Is this a momentum that is going to be carried on? What are the main subjects that are motivating the Democratic side? And also a question which I would find very interesting: how has this relationship to Bernie Sanders, has that been worked out? Is this a team now? Are they cooperating? Have all the young people who were supporting Bernie Sanders come on board of the Biden campaign? I would be grateful if you could comment on that as a beginning.
Right. Well, it's not surprising that you only see the stuff about the Trump campaign, because you only see stuff about the Trump campaign, basically. But because Joe Biden airtime. Because there's enough, but the reason is there's really no controversy at the moment on the Democratic side. Joe Biden's the candidate. He's actually moving somewhat to the left, given the recent events, such as the protests about George Floyd and so forth. So there is no controversy really on the Democratic side that I can see. There are a few primaries, some state kind of some races for the Democratic candidacy for Senate and so on and so forth in various states where there's some competition. I think it's Elliot Engel is under some pressure in New York and so on and so forth. But overall, Trump, as usual, dominates the all interest. So currently, it's not so much Biden beating Trump; it's Trump beating Trump. He's so hated by a large proportion of the public, and he's so despised by a large proportion of the public that you'll probably be able to run a campaign with any functioning adult and beat Trump at the precise moment in time. But in fact, there was a piece in the Washington Post today where it says Democrats temper their optimism on Biden because things are so volatile at the moment that anything could happen politically, really.
To what extent is the COVID-19 situation here a factor? I mean, Joe Biden is seriously handicapped in his campaign, as far as we know and as far as we hear, because he's not making big public events, and he's focusing on video campaigns and television campaigns, which is running from his own house. So personal appearances are difficult. Is that something which is felt, and does it play a role?
The thing is, I haven't been essentially out of my house either for the last three months. Most people haven't. I think the suspicion that this is going to be an election which is lost, royally lost, as it were, by Donald Trump.
Yeah.
So incompetent that, as I said, any functioning adult would be able to win the election. So I'm not even sure it's to Joe Biden's disadvantage, really, that he isn't getting much airtime or it can't go out and publicly campaign. You just saw that Donald Trump managed to get out and campaign in the Tulsa rally. It was a complete and utter fiasco. And it's probably done him more harm because people now have contempt for him than they do any other kind of emotional response.
Well, one thing that one can say, I mean, he has not had a very good run recently. Yeah?
No,
there was the disaster of Tulsa, and with all the events around it, and the discussion around it. There was the two decisions of the Supreme Court, which were very sort of directed against Trump politics. There are the books that are coming out, the Bolton book and the book by his niece, I think, and so it's in the offing. So there's a lot of trouble brewing at the same time.
Right. Now, and the thing is, that is what the situation is this week. But as Harold Wilson once said, right, a week is a long time in politics. So the one thing that gives me pause about this, in some senses, optimistic situation as far as I'm concerned, right? Trump, I think, is doing himself in politically. The one thing that gives me pause is that, who knows what will happen a week from now, 3 months ago, or whatever it was, 4 months ago. One wouldn't have thought that Trump could so mismanage the response to COVID-19 that we'd be in the situation we are in this country. And the other thing that gives me pause is while the specifically kind of campaign political situation gives me is encouraging for someone like me. What Trump is doing to the country in terms of policy, in terms of what they're doing to Voice of America, in terms of environmental regulations, it boggles the mind. And even if Joe Biden were to be successfully elected on November the 3rd, then you'll see what would happen between November the 3rd and January the 20th, because who knows what the Trump lot would get up to. And then even if he's president on January the 20th, there's a peaceful transfer of power, the ruination that he'll have to remediate in terms of policy, government, personnel, all kinds of things, America's position in the world, etc., will be huge. That it will take about 3 years to get that done, leaving him maybe a year to get anything positive done, I think. So, right. So on the one hand, there are encouraging signs. On the other hand, the complete mess that will be left, even if the Democrats win, is phenomenal.
Yeah. because so much has been destroyed and wrecked over the last years. That's going to be very difficult to build up again. Yeah. But it's an interesting factor, and I'm glad that you mentioned that, because we always concentrate on the leading personalities. Yeah. So you look at the United States, and everything is overshadowed at the moment with the personality of the president and all the sort of things that he's doing, yeah, nationally as well as on the international level. But at the same time, we have to look at the institutions and the damage that has been done to the institutions in those years. And we also have to look at the society in general, because it's not only the president who is a problem. There's a big societal change also going on in the United States as we perceive it from outside. That things are said, done, articulated, which are a little bit, which are no longer really in line with sort of international thinking. I'm thinking now on social politics, I'm thinking of environmental politics, I'm thinking of the whole problem that has beset the recent discussion with racism and the open issue of race attitudes in the United States. So isn't that also a problem that has to be addressed?
Absolutely. So for instance, just in pure economic terms, right? The Trump economy was on the face of it looking very good, right? Underneath the surface, it was a terrible economy, because it was all based on even more, right? But now the inability to respond to COVID-19, the pandemic, in a sensible way, has been, I think, economically disastrous. So in Europe, for instance, right, in many cases, they basically kept the economy going to some extent, or in, I think, the Danish and even the British cases, they paid people to basically be still employed, right? So they kept the economy going. Well, here they didn't do any. They did a little bit at all. So there's huge unemployment and so on. And again, that's something that if power is transferred in January, not November, in January, that again will be a huge mess to clear up. But you're right. I mean, socially, I think it's been, now, I would say this, Eva, that there are two ways of looking at this. One is to bewail the appalling influence of Trump and Trumpism on America. And it has been terrible. I mean, and for instance, it's now become clear that the police forces, right? There was an article today, I think, in The Guardian, no American police force meets international human rights standards.
Yes.
None of them.
Yes.
None of them. So this is, so for sort of a kind of liberal like me, this is shocking, because America is supposed to be better than that. And I think a lot has been revealed in the last 3 years with Trump supporters and so on and so forth, and what goes on in the red states and so on and so forth, which is, I think, shocks a lot of East Coasters or West Coasters, right? The liberal sides of the country. And for instance, the behavior of the Senate, right? And the Republican senators when it came to the impeachment was again, and the responses of the courts have often been shocking. Now, the Supreme Court had a couple of good decisions recently. What about the bad decisions that they've been passing recently? Yeah. So yes, there's a lot to worry about, and God help us if Trump were to be re-elected, because then many of the terrible trends would carry on. But another way of looking at it is that this has been revealed. The problems of racism in the police have been revealed, and interestingly enough, the public response to that, even in corporate America, has been actually quite encouraging. Right? the NFL is changing its tune. Now, whether they end up doing what ironically the English Premier League is doing, and kneeling at the beginning of games in solidarity with Black Lives Matter, we shall have to wait and see. But I do think that there has been kind of a change of attitude towards the kind of the common approach. So it could be that this is one of those moments which it's not a revolutionary moment, but it is a point where a crisis comes and things are revealed. And if Trump hadn't become president, actually probably the cause of progressives and so on wouldn't have gotten quite as far as fast in terms of public perceptions. Right? People would have still been arguing and criticizing President Hillary Clinton for doing stuff, rather than concentrating on the fact that she'd been doing a better job. So it could be that we have a kind of this moment of crisis, which can actually bring proper change. But it all depends on people voting on November the 3rd.
Yes, voters' participation is a big issue,
right. And whether they're allowed to vote, that's the other thing.
Yeah. But coming back to what you just said, I mean, isn't it an interesting phenomenon to see how the Republican Party in itself has changed? That it has changed in a way from a political movement to a presidential adoration society, whatever. Do you have the feeling that they have given up their how should I say their political character in a way?
Yes, they are not a Republican Party anymore. I mean,
no,
it was a very good. They don't believe in the Republic, for instance. They don't believe in the rule of law anymore. They are prepared to see the president break. I mean, the Attorney General is a disgrace at the moment. And that's not just me saying that. I mean, that's virtually everyone outside the Republican Party and thinks that Barr has been just terrible. And you have the situation where Republicans stand by and let the president fire the attorney
yes,
the Southern District of New York, who's been investigating the president's friends. Now that's banana republic stuff. That isn't the United States and the rule of law. But the Republicans don't really give a fig. So yes, so this is not the Republican Party. In fact, there was I wish I could remember who said it, but recently there was an article, probably again in the Guardian, it could have been in the New York Times or the Washington Post, which basically said the Republicans are no longer a party of policy. They are just interested in retaining power. That's the only thing they're interested in.
But that's not good enough. I mean, just retaining power is not good enough for political.
No, it's terrible. It's appalling. Eva, you know, as you will imagine, some of Esther and my friends, some of our best friends were Republicans, right? In the Washington setting. Now, generally liberal Republicans, but nevertheless Republicans. Well, so we were kind of a bipartisan family, but none of them, unless there's still kind of those friends of ours are still kind of loyal to Republican values, but they're no longer members of the Republican Party because the Republican Party has completely given up on its Republican values. There was an interesting piece recently about why is the fact that Michael Pack will be head of the kind of the office that controls Voice America. Why is that problematic? Well, one of the reasons is because Michael Pack, who used to be a kind of a normal conservative, has become a traditionalist conservative in the sense of an ally of Stephen Bannon, who is basically trying to create this far right kind of international, right? And so it's verging on fascism. so Republicans who, some of them anyway, who used to be about just, in fact, there was a strong libertarian streak to it, rule of law, efficient government, etc., etc. Now they want they don't care about deficit spending. They had huge deficits, right? All they want is to retain power, and to keep on cutting taxes, so that their people can have the power and have the money. And that's about it. That's no way to run a country, or a railroad for that matter.
Well, it's not only a phenomenon for the United States. We see that in other countries and in other continents as well. I mean, Europe has not been spared. And here also we see that in many respects, politics, sort of political content is getting lost vis-a-vis sort of party allegiances and party rationales. Yeah.
Right.
On the other side, it has come to a point in the United States which is really worrying, because there is no more, and I've seen the development personally in the many years that I've spent in the United States, how gradually the dialogue between political parties and political opponents also broke down. Yeah. And while I was in the United States, for instance, the transition from President Carter to President Reagan, yeah, which was also a fundamental switch, but nevertheless, it was the beginning of sort of the commentary people, yeah, and the neocons and Norman Podhoretz and so on. But there was a discussion going on. There was a dialogue and controversy and argument, yeah. And this,
based on
in
fact,
my opinion, has been gradually lost, yeah. At the moment, it's you are either in my camp or you are not. And if you're not in my camp, you're an opponent. Yeah?
But here's the thing, Eva, right? You mentioned commentary and neocons. Okay. So the balance in American politics has moved so far to the right that Bill Kristol is now against Donald Trump. Bill Kristol, one of the classic commentary and neocons, right?
Yes.
So you have people like Steve Schmidt and Mike Wilson, these Republican election people, right? They hate Trump. They hate what the Republican Party has become.
Yeah.
And yet,
President Reagan probably would have a hard time finding a place in the Republican Party.
I knew President Reagan. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, no, quite. So yes, so it is phenomenal. Right? In fact, one of the best writers against the Trump administration has been Jennifer Rubin, who's a person of the right, and quite hard right, but she hates so much what the Republicans are. What's now the Republican Party is doing to
Stephen, before we go, could I introduce two issues which I find are very important if we look at the United States in general. The one is that we have seen over the years the growing inequality as a social problem. And I think that is really a factor that plays a big role in politics and the way politics are shaped and seen in the United States. That's the one thing. And the second thing, which I find very worrying looking at what is happening from outside, is this rejection, a growing rejection of expert opinion. Yeah, that the opinion of experts is either ridiculed, rejected, pushed aside, and in a way, expert and expertise has almost become a negative term. Do you see that as well?
Yes, yes. Oh, absolutely. You're right on both cases. And of course, speaking as a historian and so on, I mean, it is the extent to which people just don't bother with listening to experts anymore. And in fact, if you say you're an expert, or if you're called an expert, then that immediately says, well, yeah, you're not a common man, therefore your view can't be correct. So that is terrible. On the inequality front, yes, there's definitely a major problem there, and it goes back to Ronald Reagan, right? I mean, it kind of this whole neoliberal idea that what you need to do is just free up the markets and everything will get bigger and better, which was in a sense true. It's just that everything that got bigger and better just went to the top 0.1% of the. The inequality question is also very serious. There is a third factor, though, which I think explains a lot of American politics, which is the way in which this is how this is ideologically shared out and geographically shared out is very strange. Because, for instance, where there is, to a certain extent, there are prosperous parts of the United States where there's large degrees of inequality. On the other hand, where most of the population is actually doing quite well. New York City, for instance, or California, right? The coasts actually, because they also have income, they have local income taxes and so on and so forth, and because they're run by essentially left of center democratic administrations, the East Coast and the West Coast are doing quite well, and problems of inequality and all of that isn't quite as in other parts of the country. But here's the thing. So a lot of the problems of inequality, ironically, occur in the middle of the country, where they're very badly run, very minimally run state governments and so on and so forth. Which is when they're all more or less run by Republicans. And in fact, right, one of the problems of the United States has been the basic immiseration of the countryside compared to the cities. I mean, until the COVID-19 thing happened, well, quite what the consequences are for that we'll have to see. But nonetheless, right, there was what emotionally, I think, gave Trump kind of support was the perception that kind of Middle America was being kind of sucked dry by the coasts, and the coasts also had large mixed multicultural populations, and they were very relatively liberal and so on and so forth. Yeah, so in fact, America was doing quite well on the coasts, also in terms of policy and so forth. It was in the middle that there was a very, very right-wing governments and very right-wing social situations. And the irony was that was where a lot of the poverty in the United States was. In fact, if you look at the way the federal budget works, it's the blue states. Our apologies for the reversal of ideologies, but it's the left-wing, the more left-wing states in the United States that give all their money to the federal government, and it's the red states, it's the right-wing states in the middle that take all the money. But one of the problems is that those states with relatively small populations in the middle, the Kansas, the sort of North Dakota, South Dakota, and some of the southern states, they will take up about they will only have about 50% of the population, and they are 35 states. Half the population, soon enough in this country, will be in the 15 states on the coasts and Illinois, right?
It's interesting, an interesting factor.
What that means is is that the Senate
mm-hmm.
is that 50 that senators from right-wing states will represent less than 50% of the public. In fact, I think it's worse than that. But anyway, you get the idea, right? That the geographic trends in this country are actually hugely a huge benefit to the Republicans, to the right in this country. But so against those other trends that you said about inequality
and all of this, what we just said, Stephen, will be exacerbated by the fallout of the COVID-19 crisis.
Yes.
Unemployment,
right.
Rising poverty,
right.
no health insurance.
I mean, one of the horrific things, which is the fact what COVID-19 has revealed, but will also exacerbate, is the fact that the mortality rates from COVID-19 amongst minorities, especially African Americans, are much higher than amongst white people.
Yeah,
which is another kind of, and largely because of the fact that those minorities were not as well fed and not as well housed, etc.
Yeah.
And under greater stress.
In a way that brings us back to what we discussed a little bit earlier, that you have sort of the unresolved racial question with its economic consequences, with its social consequences, with its health consequences, right. Plays an enormous role in the United States.
Right. Yes. Yeah. Yes, it does. Although I do find it interesting. I mean, just as on the other hand, as it were, it is interesting that the English Premier League is showing solidarity with Black Lives Matter and so on. So because also in Britain anyway, the COVID-19 crisis has also shown the racism is alive and well in Britain as well. I mean, structural or otherwise, and there's this sense. There's a very good article by Gary Young in the Guardian recently about how the European concentration, or the world's concentration on racism in the United States, also needs to be kind of reflected on racism in Europe and so forth, and the need to kind of have a kind of to see both sides of that issue. So I was interested that the Bristol, the Colston statue was taken down, or yes, it was taken down, and so on. And then Boris Johnson saying, "Oh well, we're not in the tradition of taking down statues or anything, or denying our past in this country." Right, and that's a wrong. I mean, but on the other hand, they didn't seem to stop them in the Reformation. But so there's a lot of hypocrisy going on at the same time.
Well, racism is not an issue that is confined only to the United States. We have our share of it in Europe also, although it takes a bit of a different form. Yeah, but what happened in the United States recently sparked something also in many other European countries. And while sort of racism in Austria, for instance, is mainly now directed against the migration issues, migrants, and so forth, that we have in Vienna a demonstration where 50,000 young people come, in these times when you had warnings also of participating on such events and so on. 50,000 came and had a huge demonstration, and you had it also in Paris, you had it in German cities, you had it in England, you had it in the Netherlands, and so on. So this whole issue has sparked something that goes now beyond the United States, and hopefully in a positive way.
Yes, again, hopefully in a positive way. If, you know, keeping my fingers crossed on that.
Well, we keep our fingers crossed also to come back to the title that we have given to this conversation, that we need a president of hope and not a president and a government of fear. Yeah. Right. Let's keep our fingers crossed that this will also materialize.
Right. No, it's quite funny that the many people think that the term limits is a good idea, because that's what would keep bad people from being in power too long, right?
Yeah.
But I think I personally think that we are suffering from a particular term limit in the United States anyway, which was the fact that Barack Obama could not run for a third term. Had he run for a third term, he would have been easily re-elected.
Yeah.
Easily re-elected. And we wouldn't be in the mess we're in now. So I'm not sure term limits are the
It's also something that we should mention very briefly, because I think we're slowly running out of time. This is not only a presidential election, but there are sort of the Congress is up for election.
Even exactly, Eva, it's an important point. Even more important, I think, well, as important as the presidential election, is that Democrats somehow or another managed to get a majority in the Senate. They probably,
which looks quite good at the moment, no?
It looks quite. I mean, well, you know, I mean, if you go by today's polls, yes, you know, everything's dandy, right?
Yeah.
A week is, as you know, Eva, a week is a long time in politics, to quote Harold Wilson. But they just look quite good. People like Mark Kelly in Arizona look as if they, you know, they'd be able to get the 4 seats that they need. I suspect Mitt Romney, if the Democrats were to gain 50 seats in the Senate, Mitt Romney might actually change.
Yes, make noises in that direction. Yes.
Whatever, because he's been very interesting. He's about the only decent Republican left in the Senate. I mean, it's quite shocking. But anyway, because you absolutely need Senate, and of course it would be even better if there was a larger Democratic majority, which is unlikely. Because one of the things about Trump is he could not have all the terrible things he's done without Mitch McConnell, the majority lead, the Republican, the majority. And that's an important thing. It's a very important thing, I think, for people not in the United States to understand, right? Had there been a decent Republican leader in the Senate, Trump's disregard for the rule of law would not have been possible. Republicans would have warned him and told him not to do that, and have investigations and so on and so forth. But that's not what they've done. I was quite happy, as long as he can get lots and lots and lots of very, very right-wing reactionary judges put into the courts. And that's all he really cares about. And of course tax cuts, which they got. So, you know, there you are. Power and suborning the rule of law that's what Republicans are about. Yeah. Not that I'm biased or partisan in this, Eva. Yes, right.
But in that respect, also the 2 decisions of the Supreme Court are quite relevant, because in my opinion, they show that there is still sort of a kind of independent self-esteem in.
Well, yes, that's true, but I do think you get another Brett Kavanaugh in there. You get, let's say you get two more conservative judges in another Trump administration, right? With a continuing Republican Senate majority.
Yeah.
You can kiss. I mean, because that sense of independence and so on, say goodbye. Because currently, what the answer is that John Roberts is conservative, but he's a decent a man with a sense of the need for an independence of the Supreme Court. Without John Roberts, you don't have that. Or if you don't have the four other basically liberal justices, then you don't. John Roberts doesn't get to be that independent Chief Justice. So although I agree, it was extremely encouraging the rulings that they did have, and Gorsuch seems to be kind of half decent. You still have to be very concerned about the Supreme Court if Trump were re-elected, because Ruth Bader Ginsburg, for instance, it all is so. It's very strange. It's all on one level very abstract, general points, right, of the rule of law, etc. And then it comes down to whether Ruth Bader Ginsburg can survive long enough for there to be a Democratic president to replace her with another decent judge. So these personal matters and these larger general matters, they do intersect in very strange ways.
Yeah. Well, let's hope that it will all work out.
Fingers crossed.
Fingers crossed is always the option. Yeah. Thank you very much, Stephen, for a very good discussion. Thank you. Many good wishes to Washington, and I hope that sooner or later we will have the chance of welcoming you here in person again in Vienna.
That would be lovely. Yes.
That would be lovely also for us.